that you weren't sure if they did, and they show up and they play well. So yeah, those are things that we have to do our due diligence on and make sure that we're trying to unturn all the stones from the tape, from the person, from the workouts. All that stuff is a part of the process to try to make the best decision we can when it comes to evaluating quarterbacks in general. Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's a requisite arm strength, right? You have to be able to make a certain amount of throws down the field, outside the numbers, tight windows, those things. But then the other part of it is that the ability to anticipate and to make the decision that puts the ball in the right window. Those things all matter. So again, you don't have to have the strongest arm in the entire draft, but there's a threshold. There's a minimum requisite, I think, is the best way to put it. But the rest of that stuff matters, I think, just as much. Your ability to anticipate, to throw on time, and to throw accurately, and you mix that with the arm strength portion. So there's a lot of different ways it looks. There's a lot of different ways quarterbacks can play. So I hesitate to fit one bucket as more important than the other, but the whole picture has to fit.
As you go through that process, like evaluating the quarterback, you look at a rookie, you look at a veteran, like how do you weigh out your immediate security versus the long-term security?
I think we're trying to get the best player, period, and whatever that looks like for us doesn't make any difference to me. I want as many good players as we can find, and it's my job to coach them. It's our job as a staff to put them in position to have success, and that part is what matters the most to me, is that I don't worry about anything other than that, and as many good players as we can get, it's our job to fit them in to our schemes, offense, defense, and special teams. So that's how I look at it. I'll never change how I look at it in that regard, that you have to be able to fit good players into what you do, and you build your systems around that talent at the end of the day, and that's our job. Yeah. There's sort of a two-pronged approach, right? There's the evaluation of the tape and what they've shown over their careers, and then there's learning about them as a person. You know, how do they see football? How do they interact with their teammates? How do they interact in your building when you bring them in? So all those touch points now are starting. So we've got the evaluation of the tape, and now you're trying to figure out how that tape matches up with the person and their knowledge of football, their knowledge of schematics, and where those things are good or where they might need to improve. And that's what this next, from now until the draft essentially is about, with the combine being the starting point, and you have your 30 visits in your spot. They have pro days, there's private workouts. All of those things factor into the process as you get closer to the draft. But right now is trying to find out as much as we can about the person, as opposed to just them throwing in a workout. I think you're always looking for the player that's going to be better longer. So you always are looking for the long term. I think there's short-term components that you're looking for, but you want players that are going to be, playing at their best for their longest, and hopefully for 10, 12, 15 years if you hit it right. And that's all positions. There's you want guys that are going to grow and continue to get better.
Trying to get a guy, like you said, to be long term. Are you looking for a guy who can be the day one starter?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Anytime you're picking, especially in the first 3 rounds, you're looking for guys that can impact and play. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not other paths to that process. There's a lot of different ways it's been done over the years with guys that have spent time sitting. Some guys have played right away. Those are all things that we'll evaluate as we keep going. But certainly you're picking a guy at the top of the draft that is going to be an impact player. That part's the hardest part, to be honest. That's a good question, because there's a lot of guys that can talk it in the meeting room. They know what to say, how to say it. They can articulate their schematics. But the hardest part is can they take what's being taught and then execute it? And sometimes it's really more about taking it from the practice, from the meeting room to the game day. That's the part that really matters the most, because guys can sometimes do meeting room to the practice field, but it's about how do you execute under pressure and under duress when it's all live. And that's the hardest part to find out. Sometimes you don't necessarily know until you know. Oh yeah, there's ways you can try to simulate it as best you can to try to figure out where those gaps might be or where you might be looking for supplementation to get them to that point. But yeah, there's definitely ways that we try to simulate that as best we can. It's not a perfect science though.
Brian, what's the biggest way that the NIL era and all the incoming transfers that come with it have changed the way that you evaluate and really calculate information out of the process?
Yeah, I think I would say probably for the area scouts, it's probably the hardest because years past, right, before all these guys transferred, you'd have 2, 3, 4 years of information gathering on a player. If you're an area scout, let's say you're the SEC, you're the Southwest area scout, and you're building 4 years worth of a profile on a player. Well, now these guys might transfer 2 times, usually at least once, sometimes twice. And now there's gaps in the information. The assistant coaches don't know them as well. You don't have the same depth of character evaluation that maybe you had before. So it's a changing landscape, and our guys have, just like everyone across the league, is adapting to. But I think there is an effect on how well you can know a player when they've jumped 2 or 3 times. You got to do your research, and you got to do your due diligence, and you got to make sure you talk to all the people at those places to sort of put the picture together. Whereas 10 years ago, you could have a pretty good profile built on a player over the course of 3, 4 years.
Is that something you have more collaboration with those area scouts in terms of being collaborating on?
Oh yeah, those the area scouts are critical. That their ability to do that and find information. They're in the information gathering business, and their ability to do that now in a changing landscape, I think, is really, really critical. And those guys play a huge role in helping put together the profile of a player when it comes to their makeup. And it's certainly, landscape has changed, and they've done a good job adapting to it.
Is their role increased?
One more time, John. Oh, very realistic. Yeah. Yeah, it's very realistic. I think he's a unique player that there's not a whole lot of other players you could compare what he's done. There's not many guys that have played that many snaps on both sides of the ball. And you watch his tape and you see his ability to play both at a very high level. So, yeah, I think anybody that you talk to about him is going to say the same thing, that he's got the ability to play both. And that I think you're going to find out where he fits if you were to get him. But he's got a really unique ability to do a lot of different things.
Does having him do that, does that become a little bit of a challenge, managing him and making sure he's...
Well, you got to start somewhere. I mean, you got to put your teeth in a position first, and then you see where you can add them in. So those are all conversations that we have as we work through the process on where a player like him. What do you do with a player like him, and where do you first start him, and where does he help you on all sides of the ball? So he can return punts. He can, he's got a really unique skill set that I don't think there's many players you can compare him to.
So where do you first start?
I would say you probably start him. He probably starts at corner, and then you find ways to interject him into the offense as he gets more comfortable. He plays more and more offensively. But I think his corner is probably his starting point. In my opinion, you might get varying opinions on that, but then I think he's got a real role as a receiver.
But offensive line is also really depth-heavy class this year.
Yeah.
How are you guys weighing that as you evaluate this?
Yeah, we got to get better up front. There's no doubt. We had too many sacks given up, too much pressure. We have to be able to settle that part down. We got to improve the front. I would say you got to improve the fronts on both sides. We're looking to add talent on both sides of the fronts, and I think you can see, the teams that were in it at the end there, that was a major part in their successes was their ability to play, stout, strong defense and pass rush, and then you got to be able to protect it. So we're always looking for trench players, I guess is the best way to put it. But yeah, there's always that outlier. If you could find a great guy, a guy that can score touchdowns at a high rate, that part factors in.
Brian, on that note, when you talk about the difference between fit and then talent level, how do you kind of measure where maybe a guy is a more physically gifted player but hasn't done things in college that fit what you might ask of him, versus a player who has done things that you've asked about but may not be the physical talent that maybe another prospect?
Sure. I think the best way to put that is our job as coaches is to put players in the best position to have success. and I would never sacrifice talent for system. It's always going to be player driven and player first. So if you can find a great player, we fit them. And however that looks, there's plenty of plays in football in all three phases that you can find ways for guys to have success. So I would always say the player is going to come first, and it's our job as coaches to fit what we do around that player, whether that's an offensive lineman, a receiver, a quarterback, a pass rusher, whatever that looks like. Our job is to fit the system to the talent, and I would never sacrifice scheme over talent at the end of the day as a general philosophy. Oh, they're both worthy of the conversations that they're in right now. You know, they're both good players. I think they've earned the right to be in the conversations they're in. As far as where I see them and how I stack them, that's for me. But I do think they're worthy of those conversations. There's some other good players in this class too, and I do think that one of the things that's most important is that you never make an assumption when you're in this process, and that you treat every prospect, whether you think they're the first pick or the 200 and something pick, that you go through that evaluation phase with the same intensity and thoroughness that you would regardless of where you think they fall. And so you have an accurate evaluation of all the players, where the class stands, and how you'd stack the class. That's also really important because there's evidence over the years that there's a lot of players that in those later rounds that end up being impactful players. And so you just make sure that you do your due diligence on all the positions from the top of the class to the back of it, so you have a great feel for where those guys might fall.
Last one.
Coming out and evidence in college that they've got that's developed this league.
Mm-hmm.
Is it harder to find offensive linemen or
I think there's a challenge to it because what they do in college is so different than what they're asked to do in the NFL. Usually you find some version of what they do that's good, whether they're a good run blocker or natural pass protector. And then there's going to be some development that has to take place. There's going to be a part of their game that they're going to have to get better at. And they're playing a different caliber of player, too, which, some of these tackles, they don't realize how good every week there's a $100 million pass rusher on the other side. There's development that goes into it, and you have to be able to do that. And that's the key for the offensive lineman is how quickly they can take to that coaching and perform.